Welcome everybody to the DANA Tool and TNM Aid webinar. Couple of logistical items before we get started. The meeting is being recorded, so if you don't mind turning off your video and muting yourself unless you're speaking, that would be great. Also, just to let everybody know, there is a PDF of the slides that I put in the invite for today's webinar. So if you're interested in reviewing the rest of the slides, you can get to that. And there are a few slides with links in it. And you'll see when I get to that point, if you need the links, you can always go to the PDF. So with that, just give me 1 second here. So here's the outline for today's webinar. Well, first of all, my name is David Call. I'm from the Federal Highway Office of Natural Environment, and I'm going to have Billy Chupp and Sophie Kay from the US DOT Volpe Center joining me today. Billy and Sophie, do you mind introducing yourselves?
Yep, sure. Hi, my name is Billy Chupp. I've been working on this tool for about 1.5 years now, and up at the Volpe Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And Sophie?
I'm Sophie Kay. I also work at the Volpe Center in Cambridge, and I've been doing a lot of the testing and documentation for this tool.
Great, thank you so much. Still a few people coming in. Okay, so back to the outline for today. I'll be giving some background and overview on the tools. Billy's going to do the demonstration for the DANA tool, and then Sophie's going to do the live demonstration for TNM Aid. And then I'll come back on and talk about possible uses of the tools and talk about future activities that we have planned for them, and then I'll wrap everything up at the end. So we are very excited to announce that these tool-related tools were posted to our air quality and noise websites in late July. The first is the database for air quality and noise analysis, or the DANA tool, and the second is the Traffic Noise Model Aid, or TNM Aid. We provide these tools as a resource to our stakeholders at state DOTs and MPOs to use for processing traffic data. And note that it's completely voluntary to use these tools, and our disclaimer statement about them is just that it may not satisfy all regulatory requirements, so please be sure that you're familiar with those requirements and make sure you're meeting all of those. These tools can be used for several air quality and noise applications. The first of which is calculating criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases on specific roadway links. Secondly, you can use them to prepare inputs to EPA's MOVES emissions model. And finally, you can also use them to prepare inputs to our own federal highway traffic noise model, or TNM. A little bit of background on the benefits of these tools. They make use of the new, very detailed speed data from the National Performance Management Research data set. So it's a very rich data set, and we're excited to be able to provide these tools to make use of that data set. Secondly, they have the benefit of relieving processing burden on analysts and saving you time, because these tools, they automatically process 3 FHWA traffic data sets. And finally, another benefit is that they have the potential to provide consistency of input data across environmental analyses across the country. So before I go any further, I did want to acknowledge the contractors that have worked on these tools. The original tools were developed by a team led by Cambridge Systematics that also included ERG and AECOM. So they created the first versions of the DANA Tool and TNM Aid. Then the US DOT Volpe Center, where Billy and Sophie work, took over the tools and conducted beta testing with them. Excuse me. And they made revisions of the tools based on the feedback that they got from the beta testers. And so we'd like to definitely thank all those beta testers for their valuable feedback that they provided during that testing period. There were 3 state DOTs that are shown here, Virginia DOT, Oregon DOT, and Texas DOT, and 2 MPOs, the Knoxville TPO and MWCOG. All of them were extremely helpful in helping us find bugs and usability issues for these tools. And so we were able to address most of those bugs and issues for the final versions that are now posted on our website. This slide shows you how to access the tools. On the left, you can see the DANA Tool homepage, and the green arrow points to the part where you can download 2 zip files. They are rather large, so please be patient with their download. They include a lot of traffic data that's necessary to run the tools. But once you download the zip files, you'll find an executable file in each of those, and when you run those, it will run the installer for the DANA tool. The first is the installer for the data itself, and then the second installs the DANA tool itself. On the right, you see the traffic noise model homepage, where you can download TNM Aid in the part pointed by the green arrow under TNM Tools. And so that's where you download the TNM Aid spreadsheet tool. I will click on the link just for a second to show you what the DANA Tool homepage looks like, and includes all the documentation that has our technical support email address. Today's webinar, once the recording is available, will be posted here. And we're also working on a video series. The first video is already posted, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So, getting back to the presentation, this next section of the presentation, I'm going to give an overview of both tools, first going through the inputs and then the calculations and the outputs, both for the DANA Tool and TNM Aid. So the DANA Tool inputs, this diagram shows the 3 traffic data sources that were used to create the traffic database, and then on top of that we layer the moves-based emission rates from the National Emissions Inventory. This creates the combined database that's output from the DANA Tool. A little bit more detail on the 3 traffic data sources that you see on the left-hand side of this diagram. The National Performance Management Research Data Set, NPM RDS, is that speed data that I mentioned at the beginning. The second is the Highway Performance Monitoring System. That provides the traffic volume information. And then the third is the Traffic Monitoring Analysis System, also known as TMAS, and that provides the detailed vehicle mix information. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide on how we combine that data with the other data. Note that for all of these traffic data sources, they are for historical years. So for example, for the TMAS data, we include 2015 to 2019 TMAS data with the DANA Tool download. So the outputs are also going to be historical information. The tool does not do any type of traffic forecasting. And so this slide talks a little bit more about some of those calculations that's done inside of the DANA Tool. Of course, the user guide can provide you much more details, but just to give you a taste of what it's doing internally, We have this diagram here on the right, which is from an example from the Denver metro area, where the blue dots are the TMAS counting stations and the gray lines are the NPM RDS roadway network. And so we have a 4-tiered system for matching that TMAS classification data to the roadway network. And the top of the tier 1, is an exact roadway match. That would be where you see a blue dot directly on a link, and that classification data would be put directly on that link. The second tier is if you're on that same roadway in the same county, we also apply the classification data to that entire roadway throughout the county. Now, if that's not available, we go to the third tier, where we have the classification information and lookup tables by roadway functional class. So the third tier is that by state, and then if that's not available, we go to the fourth tier, which is the same thing about classification information by roadway functional class, but that last and final tier is for the entire country. So then after the calculations are complete, the DANA tool provides different kind of outputs depending on which process that you're running. So there are 4 different processes, and Billy will show you a little bit more detail on those in the live demonstration. But just to introduce you to those, process 1 provides link level emissions, and this is a little visual depiction of that, what you can do with that information. Process 2 and 3 are for moves inputs for county level emissions inventories. And so this middle graphic just shows you what one of those moves inputs looks like. And then process 4 is also at the link level, but it specifically provides the TNM Aid inputs to that spreadsheet tool to predict the worst noise hour. And so speaking of the TNM Aid tool, this is what the inputs would look like that you copy from the DANA output into the TNM Aid input. And you would get the traffic data for 1 year, which includes annual average daily traffic, speeds, and vehicle mix. Now the user needs to provide just 3 more things on their own that don't come from the DANA tool, and those are shown at the bottom of the slide. That's the number of lanes, the median width, and the grade. And then once you provide that information to the TNM Aid spreadsheet tool, you can go to the separate output tab that provides you the worst noise hour, and then also provides some 24-hour metrics, LDEN or LDN. And Sophie will show you those in a little more detail during her demonstration. And this just shows you the relationship of those 3 tools to predict the worst noise hour. If you first get the traffic information from the DANA tool, provide that to the TNM Aid spreadsheet tool, and then you can take the traffic information for that worst noise hour and provide it into the full traffic noise model TNM to get your noise results by receptor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Billy to give you a demo of the DANA tool, and I will stop presenting and let Billy take over.
Awesome. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen at this point? Everything look good?
Yes, we can see it, Billy.
All right, great, thanks. So the first thing I want to, so I've got the tool interface sort of up right now running. So you can kind of get a look and feel for what's going on at the moment. But before I go into the tool processes themselves, what I want to touch on first is just the where users go and get the input data. So there's a couple different places that users need to go grab some data from different sources, and this is what really defines the specific links that roadway links that that are being analyzed, or the localities and the state and county, that kind of thing, and the time periods that we're working with. So one of those is the NPM RDS data site, which some of you may be familiar with, but this is sort of that site. You can search around the country and different time periods, and the sort of select different averaging metrics, and this all gives detailed speed data for the links around the country. So that's kind of the what the NPM RDS data is, but and the user guide kind of explains a lot more how users should go about getting the correct data sets to input into the DANA tool. So that's the NPM RDS tool searching system, and then in addition to that, users should need to go out and grab HPMS data for the specific state that they are trying to analyze. So one of the best ways to do that is using a GIS system. The USDOT has made the HPMS data available through ArcGIS servers, and these are all sort of stored and available for download from that ArcGIS server using any GIS application or any other method. And the user guide again explains sort of a lot more in depth how users can go about getting this information. But once users collect the data they need to run the tool, then everything just kind of happens in this interface. So the first step is really to just choose a state, and then I'll go a little bit into detail on the processes here, but process zero is sort of an optional process that's included here if users have more up-to-date TMAS data that they want to include in the DANA tool analysis. But we include a national scale TMAS data for years 2015 through 2019. We should have the year 2020 data coming out pretty soon. So that'll be included in the next version of the tool that we post to the FHWA website. But if users have their own TMAS data that they want to use, they can choose to run this process zero, and that's available. Process one is really where the meat starts. That's sort of the meat and potatoes of the DANA tool. Like David said previously, this produces this link level data set, as well as a number of sort of summary files that are a little bit easier to work with. And the interface here is really just file choosing. So we can go so clicking on a button just opens up a file picker. And for this one, it's one of the default TMAS input files, and it's the station file. So I'll go ahead and choose that again, but you can see I've got all of these files already chosen easily for us. And then each process you run individually. So if I run process one, we come up to this progress log screen that has a history of other processes we've run previously, which you can see I've run some of the process 4, one of the later processes, but right now we are doing the NPM RDS data process. It takes a little while because we're chunking through a lot of data, but I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this process for now. So at any point you can cancel whatever's going on, and things will just sort of end where they are. For process 2 and 3, these are the processes that really produce moves input. So process 2 produces VMT distributions and road type distributions for moves county level runs. So these are sort of how you build your input databases for moves run at a county scale. And then process 3 produces speed distributions at the same scale. So and these work very similarly to process 1. So just pick your files and then run the processes and we'll produce output. For process 4, this is to produce that TNM Aid input. So TNM Aid input really consists of speed and class data for specific roadway links. And to make it a little bit easier for users to figure out what inputs, what TMC codes to use in the bottom input here, we include a TMC selection tool that allows you to choose the TMC configuration file from the npm RDS data that we used in process 1, and then we can choose a county, a specific roadway, and the direction of that roadway, which then picks out the specific TMC codes on that road and outputs it to a text file, which users can then go look at to figure out what TMC codes are actually on that roadway. I've got a couple input in here right now, but again, this process just outputs those TNM inputs that are then actually input into that spreadsheet tool. Last thing I'll just go over quickly is the actual outputs of the tool. So the final output's pretty clear. It's saved to a folder called final output, and are clearly labeled process 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then, like we said before, the link level dataset produces a number of files. This Parquet file is the overall link level dataset on an hourly scale throughout the year. That's sort of it's a really big file, but it's stored and it's really useful. It's got a lot of granular information, but it's stored in a Parquet file just so that it's a little bit more condensed, a little bit easier to copy back and forth, but it's not super user readable or human readable. So we include these summary and sample files to give users a better idea of what data is actually output from the tool. I think David's going to go into how these output data sets can be used as well in a little bit. Process 2 and 3, like I said, were moves inputs, and then process 4 is those TNM Aid inputs. Then that TMC selection output in that text file is stored in the folder with the same name, just so the users can actually see what TMC links or IDs are included in the input data set. I think with that, I will pass it over to Sophie to show off how you would use the TNM Aid tool to figure out worst noise hour.
Cool. Thanks, Billy. I'm going to share my screen and do a short little demo. Okay. Can people see my screen?
Yeah. Yes, I can see it.
Awesome. Okay. So as Billy mentioned, process 4 outputs from the DANA tool will be used in TNM Aid. So that's where this little video starts off. You open up the final output folder, go into the process 4 output folder, and taking a look at the output file from the DANA tool. And we're going to copy all of that data apart from the headers, which are already in TNM Aid. And just directly paste that into TNM Aid, which is a spreadsheet tool. Here we go. So we've added all of the DANA output data. We're inputting the number of lanes, median width, and the roadway grade, which do not come from the DANA tool. And then we've produced this output here. I'm going to pause this just for 1 second. This is the main output from TNM Aid. You'll see your hourly noise level plots here. You'll notice that we're missing 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., but we're still getting valid data because the main point of TNM Aid is to determine the worst noise hour, which intuitively we know is not going to be 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. If we follow the trend here, we can see it's way down. So we've identified the worst hour of the day and the date of the year. So the data that comes out of the DANA tool is for an entire year, every hour for an entire year, and this determines the highest level and what day that occurs at. You'll notice the LDN and LDEN did not compute because of these missing hours here. So that requires all 24 hours in the day, but this is what it will look like when you run the DANA tool with the example files that are provided with the tool. But if you download other NPM RDS HPMS data for different years or locations, you'll see different results. That is the main crux of TNM Aid. You can also use these data to perform TNM analyses, which will be covered in detail in a tutorial video that we're putting out.
All right, thank you so much, Sophie.
Yep.
I will share my screen again. Go back into the presentation here. I did notice that there's a number of good questions being asked in the chat pod, and I think Sophie and others from Volpe are typing some answers to those as we come. We will definitely get to questions at the end, so please continue to put your questions in the chat pod, and we will cover those questions and others at the end. So as far as the possible uses of the DANA tool and TNM Aid, it kind of depends on which one of those processes that you decide to use. You can certainly just use some processes and not others. So for example, if you're running process 1 from the DANA tool, you will get the outputs shown here on the left. And Billy was showing you in his demo that there was a Parquet file that he mentioned is large, and that's because it contains hour by hour detailed outputs for an entire year for all of the links that you put into the tool. And so that would include ADT, speeds, vehicle mix, and emission rates for 9 pollutants that are shown here. Now, since that is a pretty large file, we also provide a summary output file that's a CSV file for that's an annual summary, and that provides you the annual average daily traffic, the average speed over the whole year, the link length in miles, and then this emissions intensity measure, which is reported in grams per roadway mile for each of the 9 pollutants. And what that is the sum of emissions over the whole year for all those vehicle types and all the hours of the year. It sums it up, and then it divides by how long that link is, and it gives you an idea of the high emissions locations. And so we think that some possible uses for this would be planning level analysis to identify those high emission locations, and to plan for highway projects to relieve congestion or other mitigation measures to lower those high emission locations. And the next slide that I'm going to show you kind of helps you visualize that. The DANA tool doesn't currently put anything into a map, but you can take those outputs that's output from process 1 and put it into GIS yourself, as we've done here for the Washington, D.C. metro area. And you can begin to see that, you can start to spot the roadway links that have the high emissions locations, as you can see here in orange and red colors on these maps. So a specific example of what you might use this information for would be if a metropolitan area wanted to overlay maps like this with environmental justice areas. They could see where the segments that where high emissions are having a disproportionate impact on those communities. Another example might be if a state DOT wanted to do a statewide analysis of congested locations and how bottlenecks, possibly truck bottlenecks or other congested conditions, are leading to high emissions locations, and they can then begin to think about if there's ways to relieve that congestion and lower the emissions. And I'm sure that all of you have also other great ideas on how you could use this information. And so we're looking forward to hearing about some of the creative ideas that you may think of after you start using these tools. Please feel free to send them our way. We'd be happy to hear about them. Here's just another link level example from Middlesex County, Massachusetts, outside of Boston, just to help you visualize once again what you can do with that link level emissions data. So when you get into process 2 and 3, it provides the moves county level inputs, as we mentioned. And here's just a list of those inputs. Process 2 provides the vehicle type VMT, the road type distribution, and then the hour, day, and month VMT fractions, those kind of temporal distributions. Process 3 provides the average speed distribution. It's also moves county level input. It's just separated out into that separate process because the DANA tool has different inputs for that to produce the speed distribution. That might be something that we combine in the future just to reduce confusion for the users. So as far as possible uses go, you could really use these for anything that you use moves county level runs for. So various purposes like mobile source air toxic analysis, greenhouse gas analysis. Somebody emailed me recently that they thought that they could use it to produce moves inputs for their national emissions inventory submittals. So I think there's also a variety of uses for these, and we'd also be interested to hear what you're using the DANA tool for as far as these processes go. Here's just a example of those moves county level inputs, just to show you that they're kind of in a tabular format like this. And then for process 4, which provides those TNM Aid inputs, there's a couple of possible uses. The main one that we're focused on is the identification of the worst noise hour that you would then feed into TNM for a NEPA noise analysis. But the other one is on the right-hand side of the output screen that you can see here, and that's at the RIML location to predict the noise levels for LDN and LDEN from a basic roadway. And I think the applications of that may be more similar to process 1 that I was mentioning, kind of more of a voluntary planning level analyses to help identify parts of your roadway network with high noise locations. So as far as future activities that we have planned for these tools, as we mentioned, we are working on a series of training videos. We have 4 videos planned that you can see here. The first is the overview of the DANA tool, and that one is already posted on our website, so you can go ahead and check that out. The second that we're working on right now is an overview of the TNM Aid spreadsheet tool, and we hope to have that ready pretty soon. And then after that, we'll work on videos 3 and 4, which we'll get into in more depth about how to actually run the tools for different applications. Video 3 will focus on running the DANA tool to produce the moves county level inputs, and then video 4 will focus on running the DANA tool with TNM Aid to produce the TNM inputs. And so that brings me to our plans for future enhancements, and those plans are going to be really centered around feedback from you all as users. So today we do have a short 4-question survey that we would like you to take, if you don't mind. We'll click on the link to show you what that looks like. Somebody from Volpe, do you mind putting the link to the survey in the chat pod?
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much, Billy. So the first question on the survey that you can see here is, what do you plan to use DANA Tool and TNM Aid for? This, there's the air quality applications and some noise applications, kind of depends on the different processes that we described. And then questions 2 and 3 are about some of the ideas that we have for future improvements, and we broke them up into short-term improvement ideas and long-term improvement ideas. So we're just asking you to rank these ideas. You can use the arrows that you see on the right-hand side here to move ideas up and down until you get the proper ranking, 1 being the most important and 4 being the least important. Same thing for question 3, to use the arrows to move these up and down, with 1 being the most important long-term improvement idea and 5 being the least important long-term improvement idea. And then if you have an idea that's not listed here, you can put that into question 4. And if you don't mind including your name and email, that would be helpful so that we could follow up with you for any clarifications. We also might send out surveys in the future. For when you registered for this webinar, there was a question about if you wanted to be included on our distribution list. So if you checked yes for that, we may send out a more detailed survey in the future. And if you didn't check yes for that, you can feel free to put your name and email just in question 4 of this survey, and we can be sure to add you to that distribution. So we'll come back to the survey at the end of the webinar, and I can show some live results, some preliminary results after you all have a few minutes to fill that out. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the GitHub site. It's another way that we can get feedback from you all. If you're familiar with GitHub, I'm going to click on that so I can show that to you as well. If you're familiar with GitHub, it's a way that for coding applications, you can share kind of early drafts of new versions with the users. And so if you're interested in that, you can get on our GitHub site to see things that we're working on before they're officially published on our FHWA website. And then we also have a section of the GitHub that lists issues that we're tracking or that we want to put into future enhancements of the tool. And we use this just to keep track of all the very detailed issues. This goes into a lot more detail than you saw on the survey. But if you have a GitHub account, you can sign in and add a new issue yourself. Or if you want to just email it to us, we can always put it in to the GitHub or to keep track of whatever you send us. So that's the GitHub site. And then, as I mentioned, we do have this email address for you to send questions about the DANA tool and feedback as well. It's danahelp@dot.gov. There's also a help address for TNM Aid. Sorry, let me figure out how to advance my slide again. Oh, I will. Sorry, I'm skipping forward because I didn't have it on that slide. It's tnmhelp@dot.gov. That's the for TNM Aid. So as I mentioned, we are working on another release of the DANA tool. These are some of the improvements that I mentioned in the survey, but like I also mentioned, it really depends on what you all as users are interested in. We have limited resources available to implement these improvements, so we will have to prioritize them. And so your feedback on which are the most important improvements will really help us prioritize those future improvements. We think for the next release of the tool, we'll probably also include another year of TMAS data. Right now, it includes 2015 to 2019 data. Believe that 2020 data may already be available, so we will be sure to include that in the next release. And so just to wrap up, as a reminder, here are the help inboxes that you can send us questions and feedback. The training videos, the first one is out, and we'll be continuing to work on the remaining 3 videos. Those will be coming out soon. And please send us your feedback. You can fill out today's survey. If you want to fill out the survey after the call, you can do that as well, but try to fill it out today if you can, because we won't be going back to collect results after today. And then as you start to use these tools, send the bugs and issues that you find to our help inboxes. I've got my contact information here. Eileen's contact information is here as well for TNM Aid. And with that, we will stop and take questions. Billy or Sophie, have you been monitoring the chat pod, or did you want to summarize some of the responses that you've given so far?
Yeah, I think that's probably useful.
And then we can move on to people that have their hands raised after that.
Yeah. Give me a second to find. So we did have a question about sufficient hard drive space. Based on what we've been running here, the DANA tool produces somewhere around 1 gigabyte or so of data for 1 year of data for and it sort of depends on the locality, how many npm RDS links there are, and the sort of that's what it kind of depends on. So about 1 gigabyte per run is just the output. The actual tool itself has a little bit more than that. I think the TMAS data is the biggest portion of that, which is about 6 gigabytes or so for each year. So it gets pretty big once you unpack everything.
Okay. Do you want me to read through? I can kind of push them out. Okay. And then we had a question about why LDN when TNM uses LEQ. I think, Sophie, you answered that one.
Yep, LDN and LDEN are used for non-regulatory analyses.
Okay, great. So it does give both. Is HPMS data available to use without an Esri license? Sophie, you answered that one as well.
Yep, the answer is yes.
Okay, great. How often will the traffic data need to be re-downloaded / updated?
I mean, so my answer to this one is really, it's specific to the TMAS data. We'll probably update that about once per year. But for the other data sources, it kind of depends how you're using the tool. And this is sort of explained a little bit more in the user guide. But but the HPMS data is available about a year behind. The TMAS data is about the same, I believe. And then the NPM RDS data actually comes out every like I think a month or two after.
Every month.
Yeah.
I think it's like just like 5 business days after the end of the month, something pretty quick like that.
Yeah, so that one's available relatively quickly after after it's actually produced.
Okay. Great. And then there's a question about how this tool can be used for future year analysis and planning project. The answer to that is you cannot use it for future year analysis. You can only use it for historical years. So you would have to do your own projections to future years. Did you all put anything in the chat pod that you wanted to add on to that?
I think no. I just we had a few questions about I think that related to sort of future year analysis. So I think that kind of covers it.
Okay, great. Let's see, can the national emission rates of process 1 be customized for local area, i.e. in process 2 creation of moves files?
So the national emissions, I didn't answer this one yet, but the national emissions rates that are output with process 1 outputs are they're not actually used in the rest of the processes. Those are there for sort of reference and use in conjunction with the other information that's output in process 1. We use those national emissions rates to just to produce those maps that David was showing earlier. But the process 2 and 3 don't actually produce any emissions information. That all comes from the moves run you would do with that output data, with that input data that was created by the DANA tool. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That it's, you have to think of process 1 as completely separate from process 2. There is a way, if you don't want to use the national emissions inventory emission rates that we include in the DANA tool, there is a way to provide your own local emission rates. And I think as an appendix to the user guide. I know we covered in the user guide somewhere on how they would do that.
We include a description of how we actually process the national emissions inventory information. So, if any users want to sort of follow that process and include their own local emissions rates, you can replace the national emissions inventory input with your local rates, basically. So that's one way to do that.
Yeah, and people can always contact us at the help inboxes if they have any trouble figuring that out after taking a look at the user guide. Does this take into account speeds? Would the worst hours take speed into account? I'm not sure what we were talking about when he typed that in, but go ahead, Sophie.
Definitely, yes. Speed data from HPMS and NPM RDS that go into the DANA tool come out of the process 4 DANA tool output, which is then used in large part to determine the noise levels in TNM Aid.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, this is some of the answers you were giving. Is the worst hour based on free flow speeds or when traffic is at its worst?
So the worst hour is based on, it uses TNM algorithms in a simplified manner, so it doesn't account for things like ground type and terrain and things like that. But it uses those algorithms to determine the actual noise level based on the traffic counts and speed data from HPMS and NPM RDS data. So it's measured traffic counts and speed data.
Great, thank you so much for explaining that, Sophie. And I think you put some more explanations into the chat pod if people want to read through those. How does the tool deal with induced demand from highway expansion? I'm not sure if you all answered that, but I could answer that. It does not deal with induced demand because, again, like we mentioned, this is historical information only. It's not looking at, future scenarios about expanding a highway or anything like that.
But
Yep.
if there was induced demand that showed up in the past from the highway expansion, in one of the years that we have data for, then you would see those effects.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. If the highway has already been expanded and we've collected that data now, then that's right. You would see those effects.
If the highway expansion is a planned future condition, you should use TNM for that analysis, not TNM Aid.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, Sophie.
I see a hand up. I know we're
yeah,
sort of
maybe we should go to hands now since we just have a few minutes up. Did you see?
Yeah, I
did
see,
you notice the order that people?
I see it easy. Don't know who is. I can't see the name. Hold on.
Okay.
Grod.
Oh, Gil Grzinski?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Gil. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I put something in the chat, but I'm just trying to get familiar. So right now, for all the data, the moves input stuff that you were showing, road type and all that, you have it through 2019. That's correct?
Yeah,
That's
for
the
now.
first part. First part of the
Right.
question, right? So not
Right.
2020 yet. That's going to come around the corner, but not yet.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Exactly.
And you're anticipating like by the end of the year or earlier or early next year or next month, or what kind of, do you have any idea about the 2020?
Not next month. We hope to include a few minor updates on some of the calculation accuracies that we're doing as well. I would hope by the end of the year, though. If there's demand for that, certainly let us know. We can try to get it out sooner rather than later.
Well, that brings up the question I had, which was, how did you get, because I was just looking at the presentation, excuse my ignorance of this tool. I'll have to research it. But it was showing like county level, if I was missing, county level splits of like HPMS annual VMT by, the 5 or 6, I guess it's 10, 25, 40, 50, 60, says 5 HPMS types. And I was curious how you were able to do that split, because like when I was trying to do that locally, there was very few sites that collected that in 2020 that I could use. So I used some old assumptions that from 2010. Also, same thing goes with the, I guess the other VMT splits. Did you actually go? What was the process for that, and for the speeds too? Did you use telematics? I'm kind of or is it something I have to look up in the manual?
Okay, so let me take a shot at that. I think the speeds, first of all, let me cover is from the NPM RDS data, and that is a data set that another office in Federal Highway takes care of. So you may have, they have a whole series of webinars and information on that data set, but basically it is, yeah, it's kind of telematics based data based on GPS and vehicle probes that the current NPM RDS contractor is University of Maryland working with NRIX.
Right.
So yeah, it's that vehicle probe data. And then as far as the vehicle classification information, that's the TMAS data set. That comes from another FHWA office, the Office of Highway Policy Information. They don't publish the classification data on their website, so that's why we include the TMAS data with the DANA tool download. And that is, I think you were saying that maybe data in your state wasn't that good. There was not a lot of coverage of classification counts, and that's kind of why we have those. I was explaining those tiers, and that's why we have those lower level tiers of, using classification information from the rest of the state, or if you don't have any in your state, you can use it from the rest of the country. Does that help answer your question, Gil?
Yeah, it does. And for right now, though, we only have through 2019. So once you get 2020, I guess I could try to see if I could upgrade my inputs that I submit to the NAI 2020. Because right now I'm actually using traffic count data throughout the state, picking the stations that are consistent, that don't have a lot of data gaps, and using those to be the basis, and making sure I've been able to get data from all the road types. So it wasn't as big, I got representative counties, so I've been using kind of finding counties that have the best, most robust data counts, traffic counts, and then with similar road types, and then assessing monthly, hourly, and all that way. And so, but if you have this data set that does something similar, but you guys go through this huge QA, you have all that computer power, I might want to use that instead. I don't know.
Okay, that was somebody else from Tennessee that was emailing me the same kind of question about the NEI. So it does actually sound like for the 2020 NEI, there may be some demand from several people around the country. So yeah, let us talk internally and see how quickly we can get out a version with the 2020 TMAS data included.
Yeah, and if you could include in there what we want to make sure we're using this data properly, not assuming it's more than it is or less than it is. I don't want to underestimate. To let us know how we should properly use this, so we can document it when we submit to EPA. We'll be able to explain to them what the limitations are and what the strengths are, everything.
Sure, we can do that, and feel free to follow up with us as well.
Okay.
There were any other hands raised? If not, we can go back to the chat pod. We can stay maybe about 5 minutes past 12 if we want to, if there's still questions in the chat pod. Billy, did you see where we left off?
Sort of about when I said that. We can also look at the survey results, David, if you want.
Oh, right. Okay, let me do that while you find where we left off. Okay, we have 24 responses. Okay, so for the first question, what do you plan to use DANA Tool and TNM Aid for? A variety. The top choice was actually noise, identification of the worst noise hour. So that's really good to know that people are interested in using the combination of the two tools for that. Also popular was for air quality emissions at the link level and for greenhouse gas inventories. As far as short-term improvement ideas, looks like GUI and usability was the one with the most people saying that was their first choice, followed by improve accuracy of calculations. Okay, that's good to know. Fewer processing steps, and then lower computer memory requirements. That's interesting. We thought that would be important to people, but if you all are not having any trouble running it on your computers with the current memory that you have, that's good to know. If as far as long term, a little bit all over the place, but looks like providing visualizations of emissions is pretty popular. Oh, it's updating. I think people are still taking the survey. Okay, well, we will leave it at that, I think.
Really useful results. Thanks for giving us that feedback.
Sure. Billy, was there maybe one or two more questions you wanted to pull out of the chat pod before we close out?
Yeah, just a couple more. I think one of them that's interesting is, can the data tool be used with CARB's EMFAC emissions model? That's an interesting one. The emissions, what's output from the DANA tool is, specifically formatted for moves inputs. So it's sort of what moves is expecting. If you're able to sort of take those results and massage them to be used with the EMFAC model, MFAC, yeah. If you're able to actually do that, then I'm sure it would work. But maybe that's something we consider as a future update, David. As maybe we could choose what emissions model the output results for. I think there's like one more about where the volume data comes from, but volume data, I think you answered that before, comes from the TMAS classification data. And then, are we able to make the recording of this meeting available after, David?
Yes, so the recording will be posted on our website. Give us about a week to get that up there, but you can go back to the DANA Tool homepage that I showed earlier, and you should be able to find the recording under training. If you don't see it, feel free to email me or the DANA Help email to help you find the recording. So I think we'll stop there and close out. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to send it to the DANA Help at dot.gov, and we can follow up with you. So thank you everybody for joining, and have a great day.